He wanted the whole rooftop restaurant to hear him mock my tiny office job. My ex and his young mistress laughed, thinking I just processed forms. They had no idea their $28 million clinic expansion hits my desk tomorrow. And they certainly didn't know I had my STD results in my bag, infected by him, ready to show her during that very meeting. My name is Clara Morales, and I was early. The elevator doors opened with a smooth, expensive sigh, releasing me into the skyline atrium. It was the kind of place built to make you feel small until you ordered a $30 cocktail. Glass walls soared 30 stories above Lake Point, Illinois, capturing the last bloody streaks of the sunset. Below, the city was a grid of glittering possibilities, none of which seemed to belong to me. Not in this blazer. Anyway, it was a good blazer, classic navy, but it was from the outlet mall, and it felt like it. The fabric was just a little too stiff, the lining a little too thin. I was meeting my cousin, Marisol, and I'd purposefully come 20 minutes early to get the lay of the land, to let my nerves settle before she arrived with her usual whirlwind of supportive, chaotic energy. I headed for the bar, a long slab of white marble lit from beneath, planning to order a club soda and nurse it. That's when I heard the voice. "It's not arrogance if you can back it up, Sienna, and we can—" I froze. That voice, that smooth, confident, boardroom-ready baritone that had once whispered promises in my ear and, later, carefully articulated all of my failings. Derek. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I just watched his reflection in the mirrored shelving behind the bar. He was there, 3 stools down, angled toward a woman whose blonde hair fell in a perfect, shimmering curtain. Sienna Hart. Of course, 10 months of legal separation, and he was still parading her around. She was a known quantity in our old friend group, the one everyone whispered about but still invited to parties. She wore a slip dress the color of expensive champagne, a stark contrast to my discount navy. He wore a watch that probably cost more than my car, his cufflinks gleaming as he lifted his glass. Then, Sienna laughed. It was a sound designed to carry, high and sharp, cutting through the polite murmur of the restaurant. "Oh, Derek, stop," she trilled, leaning just close enough for her hair to brush his shoulder. She looked around, her eyes scanning the room, and then they landed on me. Her smile widened. It was a predatory, deliberate expression. She nudged Derek, not with her hand, but with her knee, a small, intimate gesture under the bar. He turned, and his own smile, the charming one he used on investors, faltered for just a second when he saw me. It was only a second. Then it reformed, harder, colder, tinged with amusement. Sienna leaned back, projecting her voice for the benefit of the surrounding tables. "Clara fancies seeing you here. Still working in that tiny little assessment office? Do they even still use fax machines there?" Heat flooded my face. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn, to leave, to blend into the expensive wallpaper. A couple at a nearby table looked up from their menus, their expressions curious. The bartender paused, polishing a glass. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to drop by half. I just stood there, my bag heavy on my shoulder. Derek, ever the showman, decided to add his own commentary. He didn't look at me directly, but angled his body to address Sienna, speaking loudly enough for me, and everyone else, to be his audience. "She was always good at filling out forms," he said, taking a sip of his drink. He swirled the amber liquid, the picture of unbothered superiority. "It's a talent. Really. Some people build health systems. Clara must." "Checks the commas," he said my name. Clara, like it was a synonym for something small and broken, like something he'd stepped in and was now scraping off his shoe. I swallowed. The anger was a hard, cold knot in my stomach, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of a response. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't yell. I just absorbed it. I saw, from the corner of my eye, a woman at the table behind them lift her phone. The small red light of the recording button was on. She was filming it. Filming the pathetic, poorly dressed ex-wife being publicly shamed by the handsome husband and his sleek, wealthy mistress. Another phone went up. I was a spectacle, a little weeknight drama for the rooftop crowd. My world narrowed to the sound of their laughter and the burn of shame in my throat. Then, I felt it. A vibration. Deep in my purse, my work phone buzzed against my hip. It was a lifeline, a vibration from a world they knew nothing about. I kept my face perfectly neutral, my eyes locked on the space between them, not giving either of them the focus they craved. While they watched me, waiting for the tears, I slipped my hand into my bag. I didn't need to look at the screen to unlock it. Muscle memory. The email was from my internal, secured server, from Mid-Continental Health Oversight Bureau. Automated triage. Subject urgent. File reroute. Langford, Integrated Care, LIC 094B. Body. New submission file. LIC 094B. Langford, Integrated Care, Reproductive Services. Expansion flagged for high values. Conflict review. Must be approved directly by the head. Assigning to CM. CM. That was me. Clara Morales. To the world. To the husbands and wives of my old social circle. I was just Clara, the quiet one, the one who worked some vague government job involving compliance. But inside the MH job, and to every major healthcare provider, insurance giant, and medical investment firm in the upper Midwest, I was CM. I was the signature. I was the faceless, notoriously rigid head of special clinical approvals, the person who signed off on, or killed, every major medical expansion, every new lab, every high-stakes merger. My face wasn't on any website. My name wasn't dropped at galas. I was a ghost who wielded a very, very real pen. Derek and Sienna knew Clara, the comma checker. They had absolutely no idea who CM was. A slow, cold calm washed over me, extinguishing the fire of humiliation, the buzzing phones, the snickering, Sienna's triumphant smirk. It all just faded into background noise. I turned away from them, my back straight. I walked to the hostess stand, my heels clicking firmly on the marble. "A table for one, please," I said, my voice perfectly level. "The reservation is under Morales." The hostess, a young woman with a kind smile, tapped on her screen. "Ah, yes, we have you right here. This way, Ms. Morales?" I made sure she said it clearly. "Ms. Morales." I felt his eyes on my back as I followed her. I glanced back, just once. Derek was no longer smiling. His glass was frozen halfway to his mouth. I could see the gears turning in his head. The name Morales clicked. He'd heard it before, somewhere, in a professional context. A frustrated phone call from his lawyers, perhaps. But he couldn't make the connection. His brain simply could not reconcile the woman he'd just called a comma checker with the name that gave his legal team headaches. He just looked confused. Sienna, oblivious, was already laughing at something else, flagging the bartender for another drink. The hostess seated me at a small table for two by the glass wall. The view was staggering. I was alone. But I was no longer the spectacle. "Your server will be right with you, Ms. Morales," the hostess said. "Thank you." As soon as she left, I pulled out my work phone. Marisol could wait. I opened the encrypted file portal, and there it was. The entire future of Langford Integrated Care. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a desperate, highly leveraged gamble. They wanted to acquire a string of fertility labs, to rebrand as an all-in-one, premium women's health provider. Funded by federal insurance kickbacks, a total valuation of over $28 million. I scrolled through the executive summary. There was Derek's smiling headshot. There was Sienna's, listed as the proposed Director of Community and Media Relations. They were bragging about their model, their projections, their aggressive timeline, and at the very bottom, the one thing they needed to make any of it happen, approval for federal insurance integration and clinical compliance from the Mid-Continental Health Oversight Bureau. From CM. From me? I looked across the restaurant. Derek was in an animated discussion with Sienna now, probably brushing off his moment of confusion, explaining it away. He'd be back to mocking me in a minute. telling her how I used to color code my grocery lists. I could have walked over there. I could have held up my phone and shown them the file. I could have watched the blood drain from their faces right there on the rooftop. But that would be messy. It would be a scene. It would be what Clara would do. CM had a different way of doing things. I closed the file. I decided, right then, that I wouldn't check the commas on their proposal. I would bleed it dry with 1,000 perfectly legal, procedurally sound cuts. But not here, not in their world, on their stage, where they held the spotlight. I wanted them in my world. I wanted them in Conference Room 6. The one with the flickering fluorescent light I never bothered to get fixed. I wanted them sitting on the uncomfortable guest chairs, under the hum of the air conditioning, staring at my nameplate on the table. I wanted them to walk in asking for a signature and realize they were walking in to beg. I took a sip of my water, the city lights blurring into a beautiful, vengeful constellation. Derek and Sienna were still laughing at the bar, oblivious. They had no idea that their entire $28 million empire was now sitting on my desk, and I was scheduled to see them first thing tomorrow morning. Some people build health systems. Clara checks the commas. Derek's words from the rooftop echoed in my mind. But they weren't new. They were just a louder, more public version of a conversation we'd had 5 years ago. Standing in our old kitchen, it was a Tuesday night. He was still high off his first round of seed funding, smelling of expensive steak and ambition. I was excited because I'd just been offered a junior partnership track at my old compliance firm. I told him my goal was to one day help shape the regulatory standards for the entire Midwest. He hadn't even looked up from his laptop. He just laughed. Not a mean laugh. Just an amused, dismissive puff of air. "Babe," he'd said, closing the screen, "you're amazing at logistics. You're the most organized person I know. But shaping policy, that's not what you do. You're a back-end person. You make the trains run. You don't lay the tracks." He tapped my nose, a gesture that was supposed to be affectionate, but felt like a pat on the head. "Leave the track laying to people like me. You just make sure my files are in order." He didn't mean to be cruel. He just genuinely believed it. In his world, there were two kinds of people: the visionaries who built things, and the administrative assistants who supported them. He had already sorted me into the second box. I quit the junior partnership track the next day. Instead, I took a pay cut and requested an internal transfer at the Mid-Continental Health Oversight Bureau, a place I'd been doing some contract work. I didn't go to the high-profile auditing division. I went to a department buried so deep in the organizational chart that most people forgot it existed: the Special Clinical Approvals Board. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of Siberia. It was where complex, boring, high-stakes files went to die or be reborn, far from the eyes of lobbyists. It was the department that handled anything new, risky, or politically sensitive experimental genetic testing labs, multi-state hospice mergers, and most importantly, any private clinic seeking to integrate with federal insurance exchanges. It was all paper, no glory, and it was perfect. For the first 2 years, I learned the system. I learned that in our world, power wasn't about who had the loudest voice in the meeting. It was about who held the final pen. I learned that most high-powered doctors and hospital CEOs were terrible at paperwork. They were sloppy. They left holes. I learned to navigate the 1,000-page federal code until I could recite subsections in my sleep. I learned how to be invisible. When my boss, a man 20 years my senior, retired, no one else wanted his job. It was too much work, too little public reward. I took it, and so, Clara Morales, senior case analyst, the woman Derek thought was still just processing insurance claims, officially became CM, Head of Special Clinical Approvals. I had 2 sets of nameplates in my desk drawer. One, Senior Case Analyst, was for my public-facing desk in the general bullpen, the one I sat at when I needed to be seen doing admin. The other, Head of Special Clinical Approvals, was for the secure, soundproofed office on the 19th floor, the one with the frosted glass and the dedicated server. Most investors, doctors, and lawyers never saw my face. They only knew my reputation. which I cultivated with meticulous care. The head of Sector 4, they called me. The incorruptible. I was the one who wouldn't take the golf invitations. I wouldn't accept the courtesy lunch. I didn't take phone calls from senators' aides. If your file had a flaw, I found it. If your projections were based on wishful thinking, I rejected it. If you tried to bribe my staff, I reported you. The biggest healthcare deals in the Midwest were pushed to my desk to be CM cleaned. Getting my signature meant your deal was bulletproof. Being denied by me meant you were dead in the water. In my personal life, I let Derek's narrative stand. At dinner parties with his aspiring mogul friends, I was just Clara. I let them talk over me about market disruption and venture capital. I nodded and smiled when they asked me about my little government job. I let Derek believe I had hit my ceiling, that I was exactly where he'd pegged me, a competent, supportive background player. He was the visionary. I was the comma checker. I let them all think it. It was safer that way. I knew what happened to women who showed their power too openly, especially a Latinx woman with no family money or Ivy League connections. If I had announced my position, they wouldn't have seen competence. They would have whispered that I must have slept my way to the top, or that I was an affirmative action quota filler. By staying invisible, I kept my power pure. They couldn't attack what they couldn't see. Only one person knew the full truth: my assistant, Lena Costas. Lena was a sharp, 24-year-old with a punk rock haircut and an absolute intolerance for bullshit. She'd figured it out in her first week. When she saw me use my credentials to override a system lock that 3 directors couldn't bypass, she saw the 2 nameplates. One morning, holding my coffee, she just said, "So, senior case analyst is your Clark Kent thing, right?" I just smiled and said, "Something like that. You triage the files. Lena, you send the junk to the analysts. You send the monsters to me." She'd been guarding my door ever since, which brought me to yesterday afternoon, before the rooftop humiliation. Lena had buzzed my private line. "Clara," she said, her voice unusually flat, "you need to come look at this. A new submission just got kicked up from automated triage. It's a big one, and, you're going to want to see the applicant name." I'd walked out of my soundproofed office to her desk in the bullpen. She had the file open on her screen. Langford Integrated Care. I stared at it. "It's him," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Looks like it," Lena said, scrolling. "They want to acquire a fertility chain. They're trying to fast-track it for federal insurance integration." She looked up at me. Her eyes narrowed. "This is ballsy. Clara, they're running this through us, not the state board." I understood instantly. If they went through the state board, they'd get approved faster. But they'd be limited to private insurance and commercial loans. That was slower, more expensive. To get the massive payouts from federal programs, to get the gold-plated reimbursement rates, they had to come through the MAOB. They had to come through me. Derek was gambling. He was gambling that his lawyers could slip this massive $28 million file through the faceless, slow government bureaucracy. He was gambling that the tiny office was just full of lazy paper pushers. He would never, in a million years, guess that the final kill switch for his entire deal was held in the hand of the ex-wife he thought was only good for checking his commas. "His lawyers must think we're idiots," I murmured, reading the executive summary. "They've buried the leveraging data in the appendices." "So, what do you want to do?" Lena asked, her voice low. "I can bounce it. Send it back for incomplete data and let it sit in someone else's queue for 6 months." I thought about it. I could just delay it until his bridge loans defaulted and his whole empire crumbled. It would be easy, anonymous, clean, but then I thought about his laugh. Leave the track laying to people like me. No, delaying it wasn't enough. I wanted him to know. I wanted him to sit across a table from me and ask me for it. "No, don't bounce it," I said. "Accept the file. Schedule the preliminary review meeting. Tomorrow. In person. Conference room 6. Lena raised an eyebrow. "Conference room 6? The one with the bad projector and the whistling vent?" "That's the one." I said. Send the invitation to all named partners on the application. That includes, I scrolled down the list. Ms. Sienna Hart, Head of Media Relations. Lena's lips curled into a small, vicious smile. A pleasure, boss. That was yesterday. And then, as if the universe wanted to sharpen my resolve, they had been there at the Skyline atrium. They hadn't just been celebrating, they had been mocking me, broadcasting my perceived failure to a room full of strangers. As I sat there at my table for one, finishing my meal, I realized that rooftop incident wasn't a humiliation. It was a gift. It was the emotional prologue to my official report. Derek and Sienna thought they were writing the story, but they were just providing the introductory anecdote. I was writing the case study, and tomorrow morning, I would present my findings. The file on my phone vibrated again, a courtesy reminder that it was waiting, but I didn't need the prompt. Langford Integrated Care. The name felt like acid on my tongue. It wasn't always his, not really. When I met Derek, he was an internist at Lake Point General, the kind of doctor who still sat on the edge of the bed and actually listened to his patients. He was brilliant, charming, and suffocating under the hospital's bureaucratic weight. He hated the endless paperwork, the outdated systems, the focus on patient turnover rather than patient care. His dream, he'd told me over cheap wine in our tiny first apartment, was to build something better, a clinic that was smart, efficient, and human. Langford Integrated Care was born on a whiteboard in our spare bedroom. I helped him draft the business plan. I researched the compliance codes. I was his biggest cheerleader. I missed the exact moment it stopped being our dream and became his venture. The real shift happened when the money came in. He'd been struggling to get a traditional bank loan. They saw him as a doctor, not a businessman. Then, suddenly, he had access to a massive line of credit. He called it private equity. He called it angel investing. It took me months to learn the truth. It was Sienna Hart's family. Her father owned one of the largest medical supply distribution networks in the Midwest. Derek hadn't just secured an investor, he'd secured a patron. And with their money came their daughter. The success was fast. The first clinic, specializing in quick, high-margin diagnostics, became 3. The man who used to rage against bureaucracy was suddenly a master of it. As long as it served him, the scrubs were replaced by custom-tailored suits. The cheap wine was replaced by $100 bottles of scotch he didn't even seem to enjoy, only display. The dinners at home, where we'd brainstorm and laugh, disappeared. They were replaced by networking events, investor conferences, and healthcare galas. I tried to go. I really did. I'd stand there in my sensible black dress, nursing a club soda, while he held court. But I didn't disrupt. I didn't scale. I didn't leverage. I listened. And in that world, listening is a sign of weakness. After one particularly stiff benefit dinner, he sighed heavily in the car. He loosened his tie, the silk shimmering under the streetlights. "Clara, look," he said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. It was the voice he used on patients he was about to give bad news to. "These people, they're talking deals. They talk about the startup ecosystem, about venture capital. You don't really fit that conversation. It's not your world." "I can learn, Derek," I said quietly. "It's not about learning," he countered, adjusting the obscene, gleaming watch Sienna's father had loaned him. "It's just, it makes them uncomfortable when you're not participating. It's better for me, for the brand. If I just handle these things, maybe you just sit the next one out. Okay, it's boring for you anyway." He framed it as a kindness, a way to spare me from boredom, but it was a dismissal. I was bad for the brand, so I sat the next one out. It was the annual Medical Innovators Gala, the biggest event of the year. I had a genuine fever, 101. I was almost relieved to be sick, to have a real excuse. He kissed my damp forehead, told me to feel better, and left, smelling incredible. He came home at 3 a.m. I'd fallen asleep on the sofa, the blue light of the muted television flickering across the room. He didn't turn on the overhead light, just stood in the entryway, a dark silhouette fumbling with his keys. The scent hit me first. It wasn't his cologne. It was floral, expensive, and heavy, something sharp and sweet, like jasmine and entitlement. It was a perfume I didn't own. It was a perfume I would come to know as hers. He went straight to the guest bathroom to shower before he came to bed. You just know. It's a cold, hard certainty that settles in your gut. A truth you don't want, but can't deny. A few weeks later, I was due for my annual gynecological exam. I sat on the cold table, the crinkly papers sticking to the back of my thighs. My doctor, Dr. Alvi, was a kind, no-nonsense woman who had known me for years. "Everything looks perfectly healthy. Clara," she said, peeling off her gloves with a snap. "Anything else I can help you with today?" My heart hammered. My voice came out small. "Actually, yes, my husband. He's traveling a lot. For work, a lot of conferences. I couldn't say the words. I think he's cheating on me." Dr. Alvi didn't even blink. She just turned back to her screen. "You want the full panel." It wasn't a question. "The peace of mind tests." I nodded, the shame burning my throat. "Please." The results came back a week later. I was clean. Negative across the board. I should have felt relieved, but I just felt pending. I went in to discuss them anyway. Dr. Alvi looked at me over the top of her glasses. "So, you're clean," she said, "but you don't look relieved." "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I still have this feeling," she nodded, typing something into my chart. "Trust your gut. Clara, it's usually smarter than we are." She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Listen, I'm marking your file. We'll keep this result as your baseline. If you're still suspicious, and you come in 6 months from now, or a year, and something is positive, and you swear to me you haven't been with anyone else, well, it makes the source tracking very, very simple." She was giving me a medical alibi, a timeline. "Let's hope you don't need it," she added softly. I didn't need 6 months. I only needed 3. It wasn't even good detective work. It was a shared credit card statement he'd forgotten I still managed. A charge from the Peninsula Chicago, a hotel we never stayed at. A $240 room service charge at 1 a.m. on a night he was supposed to be in Milwaukee for a logistics meeting. I didn't even have to check his Instagram. Sienna had already posted a story from that exact hotel lobby that same weekend, tagging the location, holding a champagne glass. "Work perks," the caption read. I printed the hotel bill. I didn't print her post. I just left the bill on the gleaming white marble of our kitchen island. That night, he came home, saw it, and didn't even bother to lie. He just sighed. It was that same, tired, disappointed sigh he'd used in the car. He looked at the paper, then at me. "I'll pack a bag," he said. "Because of her?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's not just about her, Clara," he said, already heading to the bedroom. "It's about us. This isn't working. I need someone who operates on the same ambitious frequency as me." I followed him, the paper crumpling in my fist. "And Sienna is that frequency, lying, cheating." He stopped, his back to me. He turned, and his face was cold. All the doctor's warmth was gone, replaced by the CEO. "No, this is just a symptom. The problem, Clara, is that we're fundamentally different people." And then he said it, the line that burned itself into my memory, the one he just echoed on the rooftop. "You are brilliant at finding other people's mistakes. You check the forms, you find the flaws, you circle the errors. That's what you do. Sienna and I, we're good at creating things. We build, you just review. I can't be with a reviewer anymore. Clara, I need a partner." He framed his betrayal as a professional incompatibility. He made my integrity, my meticulousness, sound like a character flaw, a drag on his genius. He left. The 10 months that followed were gray. I didn't break down. I didn't send screenshots of the hotel bill to her family. I didn't throw a drink in his face. I just worked. I channeled all that cold, quiet, humiliated rage into the one place it was useful. I started going into the MCHOB office at 5 in the morning. I had to. Our old neighborhood, the one he'd left me in, was also where he and Sienna, his new partner, went for breakfast. I couldn't bear to see his silver Tesla parked outside the trendy bakery. Couldn't risk seeing them holding hands, flushed and laughing, creating their new life on the ruins of mine. Arriving at my desk when the sky was still black, I felt a strange, cold peace. I didn't need to scream. I was a student of the system. I knew that in our world, everything leaves a trail. Every transaction, every application, every email, every lie. You just had to know which database to query. The best revenge wasn't screaming in a restaurant. The best revenge was a perfectly executed, fully documented, legally airtight administrative decision. I let the lawyers handle the separation agreement. I focused on my files. I built my reputation. I became CM, and then, exactly 10 months after he walked out, his ambition landed on my desk. His $28 million future. His gamble with Sienna's family money. He thought he was a creator. He didn't realize that in my world, the reviewer has the final say. The person who checks the commas is the one who holds the power of the period. This wasn't just a file. It was an official opportunity. The next morning, I was in my real office by 4:45 a.m., not the public-facing desk in the bullpen where Clara answered emails, but the soundproofed, access-controlled room on the 19th floor where CM dissected empires. The lights of Lake Point were just beginning to fade against the gray dawn. The Langford Integrated Care file, all $28 million of it, was splayed across my 3 monitors. The proposal was slick. They wanted to acquire Apex Fertility Labs, a small but respected chain, and bolt it onto Derek's existing clinics. Their pitch was a masterpiece of marketing buzzwords, a 360-degree ecosystem for comprehensive women's health. Synergistic wellness. Patient-centric empowerment. They weren't selling healthcare. They were selling an expensive, spa-like experience. And they wanted the federal government to pay for it. To get access to the massive reimbursement rates from federal insurance programs. They had to prove they were pristine. My job wasn't just to rubber stamp their financials. It was to audit their operational integrity, infection control, laboratory standards, and the biggest, most expensive landmine of all patient data privacy. As the head of special approvals, I have audit-level access to the integrated health networks. I wasn't just reading their proposal, I was reading their system. I started with a standard compliance check, cross-referencing their declared patient processing logs against the federal insurance database. It was the digital equivalent of checking for termites. I ran a query for any high-priority compliance flags in the last 6 months. One file popped up. A minor confidentiality override flag from 4 weeks ago. Originating from one of Derek's primary clinics, I clicked on the case number. The system, by default, redacted the patient's name for privacy, but it didn't redact the operator notes, the digital footprints left by staff. The note attached to the flag was simple: patient record accessed, flagged confidential, spouse of applicant. My fingers hovered over the mouse. My blood went cold. Spouse of applicant. Derek was the applicant. I was the spouse. The legal, separated but not yet divorced spouse. This was my file. I used my highest level administrative credentials to unmask the patient data. My own name, Clara Morales, stared back at me. I remembered the visit. It was a month ago. I'd felt wrong, not sick, just off. A dull ache in my pelvis. A persistent, bone-deep fatigue I had been blaming on stress and sleepless nights. I'd gone to Dr. Alvey, my gynecologist, the one who had told me to trust my gut. Remembering our conversation from months prior, she hadn't argued. She'd just ordered the full panel. But I hadn't gone to Derek's clinic. I'd gone to Dr. Alvey's small, private practice. I pulled up the routing data, and the trap snapped shut. Dr. Alvey's clinic, like many small practices, outsourced their complex lab work. Their new preferred partner, offering an aggressive 30% discount to drive volume. Langford Integrated Care's Central Diagnostic Lab. Derek, in his ruthless expansion, had undercut his competitors so effectively that he was now processing the lab work for half the city, including his own wife's doctor. My heart was a cold, hard knot. I opened the lab report. I scrolled past the routine blood work, the cholesterol levels, the iron. I went to the infectious disease panel. Chlamydia trachomatis. Positive. The word pulsed on the screen. Positive. I stared at it. The hum of the server rack in my office suddenly the loudest sound in the world. I hadn't slept with anyone. Not in the 10 agonizing months since he'd walked out. Not in the year before that, when he was already handling things at galas without me. I hadn't been with anyone but Derek. The timeline Dr. Alvey had helped me establish was a clean, perfect, unbroken line. The source was singular. Derek. He hadn't just humiliated me. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had infected me. He had given me an STD, one that he had almost certainly contracted from Sienna. And then he had stood on a rooftop, with her, and laughed at me for a room full of strangers. The implication was immediate and brutal. If he gave it to me, he got it from her, or she from him. It didn't matter. They were a match set, and Sienna Hart was the proposed Director of Community and Media Relations for his new comprehensive women's health brand. The hypocrisy was so staggering it almost took my breath away, but the file had one more secret. The spouse of applicant flag was one thing. That was a system alert, but who had triggered it? Who had accessed the file? The log was clear. I clicked the operator ID, S. Hart, Sienna Hart. The system showed her user credentials. Her access level was Marketing and PR Tier 2. She had permission to view aggregated, anonymized demographic data. She should not have had authorization to view any patient-level diagnostic data, let alone a file specifically flagged as confidential. Yet, 4 weeks ago, at 10:17 p.m., long after business hours, she had used her login to open my file. She had seen my name, she had seen my address, and she had seen my positive result. Why the system required a user-entered justification for overriding a confidential flag? She had typed in a single, damning line, reviewing patient journey data for marketing materials. She had used her marketing login to access the confidential STD results of her lover's wife and disguised it as marketing. She was likely checking to see if I was sleeping with someone else, trying to dig up dirt. This wasn't just an internal policy violation. This wasn't just grounds for firing. This was a catastrophic, multi-level breach of federal HIPAA laws, a breach so severe it could trigger millions in fines and immediate revocation of their federal licenses. This was the comma Derek hadn't checked. This was the error he'd missed. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from focus. I buzzed Lena on the internal line. "Lena, I'm in the secure room," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I need the full financials on Langford Integrated Care, not the summary they submitted. I need the raw credit reports, the UCC filings, everything. Use the departmental override." 5 minutes later, the files populated my drive. Lena, as always, was thorough. It wasn't just a business loan. Derek hadn't just secured investors. He had gone all in. He had leveraged everything. He had taken out a second mortgage on the new, glass-walled condo he shared with Sienna. But it was worse than that. The final tranche of capital wasn't from a bank. He had signed a personal guarantee against his mother's family trust fund. He hadn't just bet his own future. He'd bet his entire family's. He was that arrogant. He was that desperate. And he was that stupid. He needed this federal approval not just to expand. He needed it to cover the massive, crushing debt he had already incurred. I now had 2 fatal violations. 1, the data privacy breach, Sienna's illegal, personal snooping, logged forever in the system. 2, the unmanaged infectious disease originating from the applicant himself, which directly contradicted the entire pristine premise of their comprehensive women's health package. I couldn't just say that in the meeting. It had to be professional. It had to be bureaucratic. I opened the standard MHLB application checklist. I went to Section 4 Operational Integrity and Provider-Patient Safety. I inserted a new subclause. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Subclause 4.1.b, as per federal guidelines, ensuring patient and provider safety in reproductive health services, all acting partners and executive-level operators must provide, upon request, recent certification demonstrating they are free from any uncontrolled communicable diseases that may compromise the integrity of the proposed clinical services. It looked like standard boilerplate. It looked like something a team of lawyers had drafted. But I had written it, right then, in 5 minutes. It was a loaded gun, and I had just pointed it directly at Derek and Sienna. I sat back, the first true light of morning cutting across my desk. The humiliation from the rooftop was a distant, cold ember. All that remained was a clear, sharp sense of purpose. I had him on the administrative front, Sienna's blatant, illegal data breach. I had him on the financial front, the crushing debt that made my approval a matter of survival. And now, I had him on the personal front, the STD result. I realized I didn't have to choose which one to use. I could use them all. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was professional. The comma checker was about to edit their entire future. I was back in the bullpen by 7 a.m., holding a cup of scalding black coffee. Lena was already at her desk, and she looked up as I approached. She didn't say good morning. She just said, "Room 6 is prepped." "Good," I said, my voice low. We were surrounded by the senior case analysts of the world, the real comma checkers. "Let's go over the staging." We walked down the hall to conference room 6. It was, as Lena called it, the misery box. It was at the end of the hall. The carpet was a depressing shade of beige, and the air conditioning vent, as promised, emitted a high-pitched, barely audible whistle. Lena had done her job perfectly. "Sun," she said, pointing to the windows. It was still early, but the morning light was beginning to cut across the Chicago skyline. At 2 p.m., it will be coming in at a 30-degree angle. I've angled the blinds. It will hit the 2 guest chairs directly opposite the head of the table. Full glare. "Excellent," I said. "The chairs?" "Executive chair. The high-back model with the extra lumbar support has been moved to the head of the table. For you," she patted the plush leather. "The guest chairs." She kicked one slightly, and it let out a pathetic squeak. "Are the standard ones from 1998? The padding is minimal." I permitted myself a small smile. "Thermostat. Locked at 67 degrees, Lena said. "Just cold enough that they'll be aware of it by minute 20. Cold, but not call facilities cold." "You're a genius, Lena." "I try." We went back to my secure office, the soundproofed one. "Now," I said, sitting at my terminal. "The paperwork. I need 2 complete dossiers printed, bound, and ready." Lena pulled up a chair. Two. The first one is Dossier A for aggression. This is the full denial. I want it to open with the HIPAA violation. I want Sienna Hart's name, user ID, and the exact timestamp of the breach on page 1. I want the full statute printed below it, with the penalties, the fines, the potential for criminal charges highlighted. Following that, a full red line of every financial risk, including the personal guarantee on the family trust. It ends with a rejection, effective immediately, and a notice of a 30-day investigative hold. Lena whistled, low. "That's not just a rejection. Clara, that's a grenade." "That's Dossier A," I said. "We slide that across the table if they lie to me, if they're arrogant, if Derek calls me Clara in that tone. And Dossier B is for begging." I said, "This is the conditional approval. This one is creative. It approves the acquisition, but with severe, non-negotiable conditions." I started typing, my fingers flying. "1, a mandatory, permanent third-party compliance auditor installed in their central office, paid for by them, reporting directly to me. 2, a complete restructuring of the proposed federal reimbursement schedule, cutting their projected profit margin by 20% to cover Elevated risk monitoring. 3. All executive partners and I mean all of them must submit to a full panel of health and ethics screenings before they can interface with the new women's health patients. Lena's eyes went wide. You're not just killing them, you're owning them. You're making them pay you to hold the leash. He said I was good at logistics, I murmured. Let's show him some logistics. Get both printed and bound. I want them to look identical from the outside. On it. As Lena left, I closed my office door and picked up my desk phone. I dialed the direct line for Amelia Vaughn, the director of the entire MHOB. She was a formidable woman who had clawed her way to the top and trusted no one except me, because I was the only one who didn't want her job. She picked up on the second ring. Vaughn? Amelia, it's Clara. I'm calling to officially disclose a conflict of interest on a high-value file. There was a pause. Amelia hated complications. Which file? Langford Integrated Care, the $28 million reproductive services acquisition. I saw it come through. What's the conflict? An old friend. The primary applicant, Derek Langford, I said, keeping my voice flat and procedural, is my husband. We are 10 months into a separation. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Clara, Amelia said, her voice dropping, I can take that file off your desk right now. I can reroute it to Sector 3. You just say the word. You don't need to touch this. I appreciate that, Amelia, but I am requesting to keep the file, I said. Why? Because the conflict is also the leverage. He has no idea who I am here. He thinks I'm a low-level analyst he can intimidate. He has no idea he's walking into my office. And Amelia, in my initial audit, I found a catastrophic HIPAA violation. A non-clinical partner accessed a confidential patient file for personal reasons. Amelia sighed, a sound of pure administrative fury. Who was the partner? Who was the patient? The partner was Sienna Hart, his mistress, and a named shareholder on the application. I said, the patient was me. Another, longer silence. When Amelia spoke again, her voice was pure ice. Those arrogant, stupid. He let his mistress access his wife's medical records. That's correct. And they're proposing to build a women's health brand. I believe this breach, combined with my personal knowledge of the applicant's character, makes me uniquely qualified to conduct this review. I want to handle it by the book. Amelia was quiet for a moment. I could hear her tapping a pen on her desk. He thinks you're just a comma checker, she said, a dry rasp of amusement in her voice. Yes. Then fine. Do it. You have my full authorization. You burn them to the ground. Clara, you burn them to the ground and make sure the paperwork is so clean, so perfect, that all I have to do is sign the last page. I'll back your play, whatever it is. Thank you. Amelia. I hung up. I had my clearance. After work, I didn't go home. I drove to Dr. Alvey's private clinic. I had called ahead. She was waiting for me in her office, long after her last patient had left. You said you needed a certified hard copy of your last panel, she said, her kind face looking tired under the fluorescent lights. Yes, the one from 4 weeks ago. The positive one. She nodded. No judgment. She had been my doctor through 6 years of marriage. She knew the timeline. She had the original copy ready. She took a heavy embosser from her desk, pressed it onto the paper, leaving a raised, official seal. She signed her name across it with a black pen. There, it's a legally certified medical document. You're sure you want to do this? I am, I said. I looked at the paper, at the clinical. Terrifying word. Positive. I've already finished the course of antibiotics. I'm clean. This is just evidence. Evidence for the divorce, she asked gently. Evidence for a transaction. I said. She nodded, not really understanding, but trusting me. Be careful, Clara. I'm not the one who needs to be careful anymore, I replied. I drove back to the MHOB building, using my after-hours access card. In the quiet of my secure office, I took a plain manila envelope. I slid the certified, sealed lab report inside. I sealed the flap. Then, I typed a label on my computer and printed it. I carefully affixed it to the front of the envelope. It didn't say STD results or personal. It said, Attachment 4.1.B, Supplemental Medical Information Relevant to Transaction. It looked boring, official, procedural. Finally, I buzzed the legal department's night desk. This is CM in special approvals. I need a clean, one-page printout of the federal HIPAA statute, Section 164.502, regarding unauthorized patient record access by non-clinical staff, for a review meeting tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. Sending it over. The printer whirred. I took the warm sheet of paper. It was dense, dry, and terrifyingly clear about the penalties. I placed it on the top of Dossier A. I put Dossier B next to it. I placed the innocuous manila envelope in the center of my desk. Everything was ready. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I wasn't preparing for a breakdown. I was preparing to conduct a review. There would be no yelling, no tears, just a slow, methodical presentation of the facts, one piece of paper at a time, until they had no choice but to sign whatever I put in front of them. I got home late. My apartment, with its second-hand furniture and quiet, beige walls, felt like a different universe from the 19th floor secure office. The dossiers were locked in my desk. The manila envelope was locked in my desk. But the plan was here, in my head, a cold, clear, perfect schematic. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Marisol. I knew it would be. Someone from the restaurant, one of our old shared friends, must have texted her, eager to spread the gossip. I let it buzz 3 times, took a deep breath, and picked up. I'm fine, Mari, I said, before she could even speak. Like hell you are. Her voice crackled, full of the fire I never allowed myself. Clara, Isabella told me what happened. She said they laughed at you. That Sienna witch and that absolute bastard. Why did you just stand there? Why didn't you throw your drink in her face? Why didn't you tell him you'd see him in court? Why did you just take it? I leaned against the cool plaster of the wall, closing my eyes. Because, Mari, I said, my voice low and tired. The Skyline Atrium is their turf. It's his stage. He's the star. She's the co-star. And I'm the extras. Anything I did there, I would have been the crazy ex-wife. I would have been the one they filmed. So let them film you. At least you'd have gotten a good shot in... No. I said it with a finality that quieted her. You don't win a war by fighting a battle on the enemy's chosen ground. You wait. You make them come to you. I want them on my turf. I thought of conference room 6. I want them in my house, playing by my rules. And in my house, Marisol, there are no cell phones. No one can film it. There was a long pause. Marisol, for all her bluster, was smart. Your house? You mean the office, Clara? What's going on? I can't talk about it, I said. But it's being handled. Okay, she said, drawing the word out. Okay, I get it. Be a professional. But what about the other thing, the personal thing you were supposed to call me? I knew what she meant. I'm fine. I went to Dr. Alves this evening. I picked up the hard copies. And the medicine, she whispered. Finished the antibiotics 2 days ago. I'm clean. I go back for a retest in 3 weeks. But the ache is gone. I'm fine. Did Dr. Alves, did she have to, report it to him? No, I said, a cold satisfaction in my voice. That was the first thing I asked. I told her that under no circumstances was she to contact Derek, even if he is the owner of the processing lab. I told her I would be handling all spousal notification personally. Good, Marisol breathed. God, Clara, he deserves... I don't even have words for what he deserves. I know, I said. I have to go. Mari, I have an early meeting. Give him hell, Clara, she said. And call me the second it's done. I'm not kidding. I hung up and the silence of the apartment rushed back in. I walked into my small living room and looked out the window. My view wasn't of the glittering skyline. It was of a brick wall in a neighboring building's fire escape. I thought of my mother. She'd come to Illinois from New Mexico with nothing but a high school education and a spine made of steel. She worked her entire life as a legal secretary, surrounded by loud, important men in expensive suits. She was quiet, meticulous, and everyone in the firm knew she was the one who actually ran the place. When I got my first promotion, she'd taken me out for dinner. I'd been complaining about a senior partner who yelled, who threw his weight around. My mother just slowly stirred her coffee. "Mija," she said, her voice soft but absolute. "Don't ever confuse being loud with being powerful. Yelling is a weakness. It's what people do when they have no other way to make you listen." She tapped her pen on the table. "You don't need to yell to win. You just need to be the one who signs the paper. They can scream all they want, but the signature, that's the only thing that's real. You just sign." I was the one with the signature. A sudden, sharp pain lanced through my chest. It wasn't the infection, it was memory. Derek hadn't always been this monster. He was the one who had encouraged me to apply for the MHOB job in the first place, back when I was just a contractor. "You're smarter than all of them, Clara," he'd said, rubbing my back as I stressed over the application. "You see the patterns no one else does. You'll be running that place in 5 years. He had believed in me. Then, he had seen my meticulousness as a superpower, not a flaw. And now he stood on a rooftop and called me a comma checker to impress a woman he was infecting with an STD. The sadness came and went in a single, cold wave. It was grief, I realized, but not for him. It was grief for the man I thought he was. That man was gone. The person left behind. The one who had built an empire on Sienna's family money and his own colossal ego was a stranger. And that stranger was about to walk into my office. I sat at my small personal desk, pulling out a legal pad. I drew a timeline, just for myself. 1. The rooftop humiliation, public, designed to make me feel small. 2. The positive STD result, personal, a violation of my health and my trust. 3. The file arriving on my desk, procedural, the $28 million opportunity. 4. The financial audit, the personal guarantee on his mother's trust, the desperation. It all fit together with a precision that was almost terrifying. It was as if the universe, after 10 months of silent, gray suffering, had suddenly and decisively handed me all the weapons at once. A flicker of doubt. Was I going too far? Dossier A would bankrupt him. It wouldn't just kill the deal. The resulting investigation would likely trigger a call on his loans. He would lose his company. He would lose his condo. He would lose his mother's trust fund. Sienna would be implicated, potentially facing legal charges for the HIPAA breach. It was total annihilation. Was that what I wanted? Then I heard his voice again, echoing in the quiet of my apartment, the dismissive, amused tone he'd used in our kitchen. "You're just good at finding other people's mistakes. We're good at creating things." I looked at my timeline. He had created this, every bit of it, the betrayal, the disease, the illegal data breach, the reckless financial gamble. These weren't just mistakes, they were choices. They were the actions of a man who believed he was above consequences. "You're right, Derek," I whispered to the brick wall. "I am good at finding mistakes, and tomorrow, I'm going to show you the biggest one of your life." The doubt evaporated. My phone buzzed again, a text from Marisol. "Are you sure you don't want me there? I can be quiet. I just want to see his face crack." I smiled. "Absolutely not. This isn't a show. It's an audit." I turned off my phone and went to my closet. I pushed past the Navy Outlet Mall blazer I'd worn last night. It looked cheap, weak. It was Clara's blazer. I reached to the very back, to the garment bag I rarely touched. I unzipped it. Inside was a suit of a deep, blue-black wool so fine it barely shimmered. It was a suit I had bought with my first paycheck as head of special approvals. It was not a friendly suit. It was not a collaborative suit. It was a suit I wore for exactly one purpose, sitting across from hospital CEOs and private equity partners who earned 10 times my salary and making them understand that I held their future in my hands. I laid it out on the bed, the sharp-shouldered jacket, the perfectly creased trousers, the simple, severe black silk shell to go underneath. This was not the woman from the rooftop. This was not the comma checker. This was CM. I set my alarm for 4:30 in the morning. I got into bed and turned off the light. I expected to lie awake for hours, my mind racing, but I didn't. My breathing was even. My heart was slow. The anger had burned away, leaving something cold and hard and clear. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a crazy ex-wife. I was a regulator, and I was going to sleep, because tomorrow was a very big day at the office. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. At 8:15 a.m., Lena burst into my secure office, not even bothering to knock. She was holding her tablet, her face pale. "They're panicking," she said. "Who's panicking?" "Their lawyers, Barton and Lyle Health Counsel. I just got an email from their senior partner. They're eager to expedite the signing process and want to know if they can bring the final signatory documents to today's preliminary review." Lena looked up at me. "Clara, they're not just ready to sign. They're desperate. They think this is just a rubber stamp." "They're right to be desperate," I said. I hadn't just looked at the HIPAA breach. I had spent the last hour in their financials. "Pull up the supplemental reports, the ones their lawyers didn't include in the main file." I swiveled to my own monitor, pulling up the executive compensation projections. Derek has already promised Sienna Hart the position of Director of Medical Communications. The proposed salary is $190,000 a year. "For what?" "For posting on Instagram," Lena scoffed. "For being his partner," I said, my voice flat. "But that's not the good part. Look at this." I pointed to a line item in their debt schedule. "They're floating the acquisition on a $3.5 million bridge loan from a private equity firm in New York." Lena scanned the document. "Okay, that's standard for a high-leverage deal." "It is," I said. "Unless you look at the maturity date." I tapped the screen. "It's due, this Friday. If MHOB approval isn't secured by then, the loan doesn't convert to long-term financing, it defaults, and the penalty clause kicks in." "What's the penalty?" Lena asked, leaning in. "The interest rate," I said, "jumps from 8% to 19%, compounded daily, and the personal guarantees are triggered. His mother's trust, the condo, everything." Lena sat back, letting out a slow, heavy breath. "My God, Clara, they're not just over-leveraged, they're standing on a landmine." "Yes, they are." "So, you don't even have to do anything," she realized, her voice filled with awe. "You just wait. You invoke your legal right to a 30-day review. You just let the clock run out. By this time next month, they'll be bankrupt. You don't even have to see them." I thought about it. I really did. I pictured Derek, checking his email every hour, the color draining from his face as his lawyers told him the file was still in review. I pictured him trying to explain to Sienna, and to his mother, how the entire $28 million deal had evaporated because of a bureaucratic delay. It would be clean, it would be easy, but it wouldn't be enough. He wouldn't know I did it. He would blame a faceless, incompetent government drone. He would still think he was the smartest man in the room, just beaten by the system. He would never have to look me in the eye. He would never have to reckon with the woman he'd humiliated. "No," I said. "Delaying is a death by 1,000 cuts. I'm not interested in that." I looked at the clock, 8:20. "I want them to sign today. I want them to walk in here, arrogant and unprepared, and I want them to sign Dossier B. I don't want to just ruin them. I want to own them. I want him to know, every single day for the rest of his career, that his comma checker holds the leash." A new email pinged in my inbox. My pulse quickened. It wasn't from Lena. It was from Sienna Hart. Subject presentation for 2 p.m. Meeting. My hand froze on the mouse. She had sent it directly to the case analyst email address, the one for the public-facing Clara. "Hi, Clara. So looking forward to our meeting this afternoon. Derek and I are excited to walk you through our vision. I've attached our presentation deck so you can get a sneak peek. We believe you'll be as excited as we are. See you at 2 Sienna Hart. The email was so condescending, so patronizingly cheerful. It made my skin crawl. She thought she was writing to a secretary. I opened the attachment. It was a slick, glossy PowerPoint, pictures of smiling women, graphs with dramatic upward curves. And then I saw it. Slide 12. The slide was titled, "Our Commitment to Privacy, Absolutely Confidential." It was a detailed graphic bragging about their industry-leading, fully encrypted testing system for sensitive procedures. And right in the middle, in a bright, friendly icon, was a box labeled STD screening. She was so arrogant, so profoundly stupid, that she was bringing a slide bragging about the very system she had used to illegally access my personal medical file. She was handing me the murder weapon. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I forwarded the email to Lena. "Print this slide. Hard copy. One for me. One for Dossier A." "You're kidding me," Lena breathed, reading it. This is a gift. She's a creator." "Lena," I said. "She creates evidence. At 1:30, I made my last call. This is CM in special approvals." "Yes, for the 2 p.m. in conference room 6. I need the privacy glass activated. The one-way frost. Yes, so I can see out. But they can't see in. Thank you." At 1:55, I was standing in the hallway, 10 feet from the door to room 6. The glass was now an opaque, milky white from their side, from my side. It was a perfectly clear window. Lena had placed the folders, the manila envelope, and the water glasses precisely. The room was cold. The whistle from the vent was a faint, maddening shriek. At 1:58, the elevator doors at the end of the hall chimed. They appeared. Derek was in the lead. Of course, he wore his deal suit, a charcoal gray so dark it was almost black, with a power blue tie. He looked confident, rested, energized. He was the visionary, the creator. About to charm some low-level paper pusher, Sienna was beside him. She wore a tight, cream-colored dress that was completely inappropriate for a federal building. She looked slightly nervous, but she was hiding it well. Clutching a leather portfolio to her chest, she was posturing, trying to look like the executive she'd been promised she could be. Behind them, a matched set of 2 silver-haired lawyers from Barton and Lyle, both carrying briefcases that looked heavier than they were, and bringing up the rear. A pale, anxious-looking man I recognized from the file as their chief financial officer. They looked like a firing squad, ready to overwhelm with sheer numbers. Derek pointed to the door. "This is it, room 6. Sienna looked at the frosted glass. "Weird. It looks like a doctor's office." "It's the government, babe," Derek said, patting her lower back. "They're not known for aesthetics." She laughed. As she did, she adjusted the sleeve of her dress, and I saw it, gleaming on her wrist, catching the ugly fluorescent light of the hallway, was the sapphire bracelet, the same one she had worn at the Skyline atrium. The one she had gestured with, her hand flashing blue, as she'd mocked me. Do they even still use fax machines there? All the air left my lungs, any flicker of doubt, any last vestige of mercy, any thought of the man he used to be. It all vanished. The grief I'd felt last night was gone, burned away by a white-hot, clarifying rage. It wasn't just about the money, or the company, or even the betrayal. It was about this, the laughter, the humiliation, the disease, the bracelet. They were still standing outside the door. The lawyers checking their phones. Derek saying something charming and low to Sienna. They were still smiling. They thought they were here to meet Clara, the comma checker, the mousy, brown-haired woman in the discount blazer they'd mocked on a rooftop. I stood up straight, adjusting the sharp shoulders of my own, perfectly tailored, blue-black suit. I picked up the manila envelope, the one marked Attachment 4.1b. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of the truth. I took one deep, cold breath, and I walked out of the shadows, toward the door, to finally introduce them to CM. I waited. I stood in the hall, watching them through the one-way glass, until the digital clock on my secure phone read 1:59 and 59 seconds. As it clicked over to precisely 2 p.m., I pushed open the door to conference room 6. The high-pitched, whistling whine of the vent was the first thing that hit them. The second was the 67-degree chill. They all looked up, annoyed, a 5-person delegation expecting a functionary. My heels clicked once on the linoleum entrance before sinking into the stained beige carpet. Derek saw me first. It was not a gradual recognition. It was a physical impact. The charming, predatory smile he had prepared for the low-level bureaucrat shattered. His mouth fell open. His skin, so tan and healthy under the rooftop lights, turned a waxy, sickly gray. He saw the woman from the skyline atrium, the one in the cheap blazer, but he could not process her here, in this room, walking toward him in a suit that cost more than his Sienna, by contrast, just looked annoyed. She frowned, her eyes flicking past me to the hallway, as if I were a waitress who had forgotten her lemon. She was still waiting for the head of the department to arrive. I said nothing. I walked the length of the table, the scent of my sharp lavender perfume cutting the stale air. I passed the 2 silver-haired lawyers. I passed the pale CFO. I passed Sienna, and I passed Derek. I went to the head of the table, to the high-backed executive chair Lena had reserved for me. I set down my heavy, leather-bound portfolio. Next to it, I placed the plain manila envelope. Then, from my portfolio, I withdrew the polished, heavy brass nameplate. I set it down on the table, facing them. Clara Morales, Head, Special Clinical Approvals. There was a profound, terrible silence. The only sound was the whistling vent. Sienna read the nameplate, her brow furrowed in confusion. Clara Morales, she whispered to Derek. Isn't that? But Derek couldn't answer. He was staring at the nameplate as if it were a snake. I could see the connections being made. The terrible, frantic arithmetic, the wife he mocked, the tiny office, the file, the name his lawyers must have been battling. Clara, CM, Clara Morales. They were the same person. He understood. One of the lawyers, the older one, finally put on his reading glasses and leaned forward. He read the nameplate, and his professional demeanor cracked. He looked at Derek with a sudden, dawning horror. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Ms. Hart, I said. My voice was low, steady, and amplified by the room's terrible acoustics. Thank you for coming. I am Clara Morales. The review and final approval for the Langford Integrated Care Expansion, file LIC 094B, rests with me. Sienna looked around the room, still hopelessly confused. Wait, I don't understand. Where is the department head? They told us we were meeting with the head of approvals. I am the head of special clinical approvals, Ms. Hart, I said, my eyes locking onto hers. The sapphire bracelet on her wrist seemed to pulse. I am the final review. The older lawyer cleared his throat, trying to salvage the situation. Ms. Morales, we were, under the impression this was largely a formality. Our counsel? Your counsel was misinformed, I interrupted, my voice still polite, still cold. We are here today to discuss 3 primary areas of concern before I can render a decision. Group 1, financial leveraging and applicant risk. Group 2, patient data confidentiality and security protocols. And Group 3, communicable disease control and partner integrity. Derek finally found his voice. It was a strangled, weak imitation of his usual confident baritone. He forced a laugh, a dry, barking sound. Clara, Ms. Morales, well, this is quite the surprise. He tried to smile, the old, charming smile. I'm sure we can resolve any concerns you have very quickly. This is all just paperwork, right? He was trying to shrink me again, to put me back in the box of comma checker. I met his terrified gaze. That depends entirely on your level of honesty this afternoon. Mr. Langford, I said, how quickly we resolve this is up to you. The Mr. Langford landed like a slap. His forced smile vanished. I opened my portfolio. Let's begin. Group 1 Finance. I directed my attention to the pale CFO, who now looked like he was going to be physically ill. Your market acquisition strategy, I said, my tone academic, is impressive. The market synergy you've identified is significant. The CFO nodded, relieved. The lawyers leaned back, relaxing 1%. The financial structure you've used to fund it, however, I continued, is not just aggressive, it is catastrophic. The CFO's head snapped up. I have your UCC filings, your debt covenants, your private equity contracts. You haven't just leveraged your existing clinics. Mr. Langford, I turned my gaze back to Derek. You have personally guaranteed this deal against your new condominium. You have signed a personal guarantee against your mother's family trust fund. You are all in. The lawyers were not relaxed. They were staring at Derek, their faces hardening into identical masks of fury. This was clearly news to them. You are currently floating on a $3.5 million bridge loan that matures in 3 days, I said, as if reciting the weather. If my signature is not on an approval by close of business Friday, your interest rate jumps from 8% to 19%, compounded daily. The default triggers the call on all personal guarantees. You won't just lose the deal. You will lose your company, your condo, and your mother's money. I leaned forward. You have bet your entire family's financial future on the assumption that my tiny office was too stupid to read the fine print. I then shifted my gaze, slowly, to Sienna. She was pale, her fingers twisting in her lap. Which brings me to your partners, I said softly. I must assume you have been fully transparent with all of them about this level of personal risk. I gave her a small, thin smile. After all, I don't think the mistress wants to lose her house, too. The word mistress hung in the cold, whistling air. Sienna's head snapped up, her face blooming with a blotchy, furious red. What? What did you just call me? I apologize, I said, my voice dripping with false procedure. Is that not your operational title? My mistake. The file lists you as Director of Medical Communications at a proposed salary of $190,000. But given your personal, non-clinical, and undocumented relationship with the CEO, I assumed Mistress was the more accurate designation. It's a risk factor. Ms. Hart, you can't, she sputtered, half rising from her squeaky chair. This is a professional meeting. You can't talk to me like that. The older lawyer put his head in his hands. Derek, what did you do? He whispered. You are absolutely right. Ms. Hart, I said. My voice cut through her rage like a razor. This is a professional meeting, so let's be professional. I turned back to my folder, as if her outburst was nothing. That brings me to Group 3, Communicable Disease Control. I let my gaze travel from Derek to Sienna, and back to Derek. Your entire brand, I said, is built on comprehensive women's health, on trust, on safety, on confidentiality. I reached over and placed my hand on the manila envelope, the one marked Attachment 4.1.B. Therefore, as part of our due diligence into your proposed services, we must be absolutely certain that communicable diseases are not being concealed, that the executive partners themselves are not a vector for infection. I pushed the envelope into the center of the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped, perfectly centered between them. Derek looked at the envelope. He knew. He didn't know how I knew, but his face told me he knew exactly what was inside. He was no longer a CEO. He was just a terrified man. You can't, he whispered, his voice cracking. Clara, no. That is private. Sienna looked from his face, full of dawning horror, to the envelope. Her anger was gone, replaced by a new, cold confusion. Private, what is that? I looked at Derek. I looked at Sienna, and the glittering blue bracelet on her wrist. It is, I agreed, my voice calm and quiet. It is private. I folded my hands. And as it is my medical file, I have every right to bring it to this negotiation. The whistling of the vent was the only sound in the universe. Sienna's face went from confused to pale to chalk white. She finally understood. This was not an audit. This was an execution. And the wife she had mocked on a rooftop had just placed the evidence of her husband's betrayal and her own infection on the table. I did not open the manila envelope, not yet. It sat in the middle of the table, a silent, beige bomb. While I opened my own portfolio, I pulled out a single sheet of paper. Let's begin with the source data. Shall we? I said, my voice resonating in the cold, quiet room. This is a diagnostic report from your own lab system. Mr. Langford, processed 4 weeks ago. The patient is listed as Clara Morales. That's me. I turned the paper around for the lawyers to see, though it was too far for them to read. My finger was on a single line. The finding, I said, is chlamydia trachomatis, positive. Sienna let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The lawyers, who had been bracing for a financial argument, looked utterly, profoundly lost. Derek just closed his eyes. As I am sure you are aware, Mr. Langford, I continued, my tone as dry as if I were discussing a zoning variance. I have been in a separated, non-physical relationship with you for 10 months, in that time, and in the months prior. I have had sexual contact with exactly one person. I let the silence stretch. Derek did not move. That person, I said, was you. This means, by a simple and unavoidable process of elimination, that the source of this infection, the primary vector, originates from within the executive leadership of the applicant organization, an organization that is currently seeking federal approval to sell comprehensive women's health services. I turned my gaze, slowly, from Derek's gray face to Sienna's white one. Ms. Hart, I said. She jumped, her eyes wide with panic, the sapphire bracelet clattering against the table. I have here, I said, picking up the glossy printout of her PowerPoint slide. Your presentation, slide 12, our commitment to privacy absolutely confidential. You yourself are bragging about your STD screening protocols. I leaned forward. As the proposed director of medical communications, and as the known, close partner of the primary infection vector, I need to confirm for this record, have you been tested? She stammered. Her eyes darted to Derek, then to her lawyers. She was looking for a lifeline. I'm perfectly healthy. This is harassment. It is not harassment, Ms. Hart. It is due diligence, I said flatly. I am glad to hear you are healthy. Then you will have absolutely no problem providing a certified, negative test result from a non-Langford affiliated lab to be appended to this file before I can render my decision. This is insane, Derek finally exploded, his voice cracking. He slammed his hand on the table. This is a personal matter. It has nothing to do with this deal. You are abusing your power. Am I? I asked. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper, still warm from the printer. On the contrary, Mr. Langford, I am following procedure. I slid the paper across the table to the older lawyer. This is MHOB Internal Regulation 4.1b. It was authored by me this morning and co-signed by my director, Amelia Vaughn, at 8:15 a.m. It states that all executive-level operators and named partners on an application for reproductive health services must, upon request, certify they are free from any uncontrolled communicable diseases that could compromise patient trust or clinical integrity. As of this morning, Mr. Langford, your personal life has everything to do with this deal. The lawyer read the clause. His face, already grim, became a mask of despair. He knew. He was trapped. I had just built the box, put them inside it, and nailed the lid shut, all while they were busy checking their portfolios. But that, I said, turning to Sienna, is actually the least of your legal concerns today. I pulled another sheet from my file. Let's move to Group 2, I said. Patient data confidentiality, Ms. Hart, On October 11th, at 10:17 p.m., a user ID, S. Hart, logged into the Langford Integrated Care System. Sienna stopped breathing. That user ID, I continued, accessed a patient file that was flagged by the system as confidential, spouse of applicant. My file, your user ID, then bypassed the warning protocol by entering a justification. The justification you wrote was reviewing patient journey data for marketing materials. I looked up, my eyes locking with hers. You used your public relations login, Ms. Hart, to illegally access my private medical records. You were not reviewing a patient journey. You were digging for dirt on your lover's wife. That is not a policy violation. That is a federal crime. The older lawyer made a noise, a low groan of absolute defeat. He threw his pen onto the table. "Derek," he hissed. "You told us this was a simple conflict of interest. You told us she was just your wife. You didn't tell us you and your associate were committing federal offenses. We are done. This meeting is over." "Sit down," I commanded. The lawyer, a man who charged $900 an hour, sat. "The meeting is not over," I said calmly. "You are correct, counsel. I have everything I need to deny this application, but we are not going to do that. We are going to find a solution." I reached under the table and brought up two identical, thick, spiral-bound dossiers, Dossier A, Dossier B. I slid Dossier A toward the lawyers. "This is option A. Dossier A is the full denial. It outlines, in excruciating detail, the HIPAA breach by Ms. Hart. It details the undisclosed, active communicable disease from the CEO. It recommends an immediate, full-spectrum audit of your entire operation by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Federal Insurance Commission. When this report is filed, your bridge loan will be called. The default will trigger the personal guarantees. You, Mr. Langford, will be in receivership by Monday. You, Ms. Hart, will likely be facing a grand jury." I let the weight of the words settle in the 67-degree air. The only sound was the whistling vent. "Or," I said, "there is option B." I slid the second, identical dossier across the table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "This," I said, "is the conditional approval. You sign this, today, right now, you sign this, and Dossier A disappears." "What? What are the conditions?" The pale CFO finally whispered. "They are non-negotiable," I said. "One Langford Integrated Care will accept a permanent, third-party compliance auditor to be installed in your headquarters. This auditor will be chosen by me, paid for by you, and will report only to me. That's—" Derek started. "I'm not finished," I said. 2. The proposed federal reimbursement schedule is rejected. You will accept a revised schedule. I tapped the file. "Which cuts your projected profit margin by 20% to fund what I am deeming a high-risk monitoring protocol. 3. All named executive partners, specifically Mr. Langford and Ms. Hart, will submit to a full health screening and ethics review, as per Regulation 4.1. Before this approval is finalized." I leaned back in my high-backed chair. "Dossier A is total, immediate, and public ruin. Dossier B is servitude. You will still make money, Mr. Langford, but you will be on a very short leash, my leash. You will spend the rest of your career checking your work, knowing that I am the one checking you." Derek looked at his lawyers. The older one, Barton, just pushed Dossier B toward him. "Sign it, Derek," he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "Sign the damn paper before she changes her mind." Derek was trembling. His arrogance, his confidence, his rooftop laughter, it was all gone. He looked small. He looked like the comma checker. With a shaking hand, he reached for the pen. "One final piece of procedure," I said. He froze, his hand hovering over the paper. "We have addressed the administrative, the financial, and the legal. We have not yet addressed the ethical." I finally reached out and picked up the plain manila envelope from the center of the table. Attachment 4.1.b. Supplemental medical information relevant to transaction. This, I said, is my certified lab result. The one from Dr. Alvey, stamped and sealed. The one that proves everything I've said today is true. I held it. Under federal public health guidelines, as I'm sure you know, Dr. Langford, a provider has a duty to warn. We have established a positive test from a confirmed source. This source, Mr. Langford, has a moral and legal obligation to inform all other partners who may be at risk. I held the envelope out, but I did not hand it to Derek. I turned my body, my chair swiveling slightly, and extended my hand directly to Sienna Hart. Ms. Hart, I said, my voice quiet, almost gentle. I believe this belongs to you. Sienna's hand was suspended in the air. It was trembling. The sapphire bracelet, the one that had flashed with such arrogance at the rooftop bar, now just looked like a cold, blue shackle. She stared at the manila envelope as if it were radioactive. What? What do you mean? It belongs to me, she whispered. According to our internal regulations, I said, my voice measured. And frankly, according to my own personal code of ethics, I am compelled to deliver this information to the individual I assess is at the highest risk of infection. I pushed the envelope the final 6 inches until it touched her fingertips. That person is you, Ms. Hart. Derek made a choked sound. Clara, don't, please. But Sienna, driven by a terrible, magnetic dread, took it. Her fingers fumbled with the flap. The lawyers watched, paralyzed. They had no framework for this. This wasn't in their case law. She pulled out the single, certified sheet of paper. Dr. Alvey's official, embossed seal was at the bottom. Sienna's eyes scanned the page. She saw the clinical letterhead. She saw the patient name Clara Morales. And then she saw the finding chlamydia trachomatis, positive. Her face, which had been chalk white, somehow lost even more color. I watched her mind work. I could see the exact moment the calculation finished. Clara Morales, positive. She looked at Derek, her expression one of pure, unadulterated horror. She understood. She understood that he had given it to me. She understood that he had, therefore, given it to her, and she understood, in that same sickening instant, that during the time he was sleeping with her, his new, ambitious partner, he had also been sleeping with me, his boring wife, unprotected. The entire foundation of their creator partnership was a lie, built on shared fluids and mutual deceit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The whistling vent filled the silence where her shriek should have been. I've already completed the full course of antibiotics, I said, my voice conversational, as if discussing the weather. I am clean, but given the circumstances of your partnership, I would strongly recommend you get tested. Today. I tapped the glossy PowerPoint slide, the one she had been so proud of, which still lay on the table. And Ms. Hart, I would pull slide 12 from your presentation. The claim of absolutely confidential seems inaccurate. Sienna. Derek stammered, his hands flapping uselessly on the table. I didn't. That was just. It was a mistake. He was trying to minimize it, to excuse it, to lie his way out of the unfixable. The older lawyer, Barton, shot him a look of such concentrated venom that Derek's words died in his throat. Shut up, Derek, Barton hissed. Do not say one more word, not one. But Sienna wasn't looking at Derek anymore. The personal betrayal had been processed in an instant, replaced by something much colder: financial panic. She was, after all, ambitious. She turned her terrified, furious gaze not to me, but to her lawyer. Mr. Barton, she said, her voice a high, thin wire, if I am infected from this facility, from the CEO, does that affect my executive status, my role in the company? Barton sighed. rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked like a man who was already calculating his malpractice insurance premiums. "Ms. Hart," he said, his voice ragged with exhaustion, "you are the proposed director of a women's health brand. If you are actively infected with a communicable disease by the CEO, that you both then concealed, yes, I would say it directly impacts your fitness to serve as an executive." Sienna looked like she was going to faint. She had come here for a $190,000 job. She was leaving with a medical diagnosis and a dead career. "Well," I said, breaking the silence, "I am glad we are all finally on the same page regarding the seriousness of the operational risks." I pulled Dossier B back to the center of the table. "This is the conditional approval. This is your only way out. Sign it, and this meeting ends. The audit I've recommended will be internal." I turned the document around and uncapped my pen. A thick, black, felt-tip pen. I slid it across the table. "I've already highlighted the relevant clauses," I said. "The new profit margins, cut by 20%, the mandatory installation of my auditor, and this one." I tapped a paragraph on the final page. "Page 14, Clause 8C. This approval is subject to immediate quarterly reevaluation and potential revocation based on the discovery of any future non-disclosed internal health or ethical compliance failures." I looked at Derek. "It means if you ever try anything like this again, I will own the company, not just the leash. Do you understand?" Derek was a shell. The man from the rooftop was gone. He picked up the heavy pen. His hand was shaking so violently that when he tried to sign his name, the first stroke of the D skidded across the page. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. There was no mercy in mine. He put his head down, using his other hand to steady his writing wrist. And he signed. He signed away his profit. He signed away his autonomy. He signed away his empire. He did it in front of his mistress, his lawyers, and the wife he had called a comma checker. "Ms. Hart," I said, "you next?" As a named partner, Sienna's gaze was fixed on the white sheet of paper in her lap. The certified lab result, her hand, the one with the sapphire bracelet, was shaking just as badly as Derek's. She picked up the pen. She signed her name, her eyes never leaving the evidence of her own humiliation. The rooftop, the laughter, the smug, superior mocking, it was all paid for, right here, in this freezing cold, whistling room, with 2 signatures on a document of total surrender. I capped my pen. I stood up. The sound of my chair sliding back was loud in the silence. I methodically gathered my files. Dossier B, the signed one, went into my portfolio. Dossier A, the grenade, I left on the table, a souvenir. I did not take the manila envelope. I left that with Sienna. I stood at the head of the table, my bag on my shoulder, my portfolio in my hand. I was no longer Clara the victim. I was CM, the head of special clinical approvals, and my work here was done. I looked at Derek. He was slumped in his cheap, squeaky chair, a broken, gray-faced man. "One last piece of professional advice, Mr. Langford," I said, my voice clear and cold. He looked up, his eyes dull. "The next time you decide to mock someone in public, you had better be absolutely certain that person isn't the one holding the pen that signs your fate." I turned. I walked the length of the room. My heels clicked on the carpet. I opened the door and stepped out into the bright, normal hallway, letting the door click shut behind me. I left them all there. I left them in the 67-degree chill, with the maddening whistle of the vent and a signed confession. I left Derek to face his furious lawyers and his ruined finances, and I left Sienna Hart, sitting in the glare of the afternoon sun, staring at the positive STD test that had just cost her everything. There was no follow-up. There was no epilogue. The file was closed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Remember to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories. Like this video, And give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.